Solution Roundtable once again. You've all got your cameras on, I think, so that's great. We just want this to be interactive. We want people to contribute, so keep those cameras on. If you've not got your Zoom profile renamed, please do that, because then it's just easier to find you when we need to bring you onto the screen. So if you can put first name and maybe your location, that would be really helpful. We've got some speakers lined up, but if anybody's got any questions, please just pop them in the chat at the bottom of the screen. So click on the chat button and we will monitor the chat box as we go through this session and pick up your questions, maybe at a opportune time or maybe at the end. On today's topic, we are really pleased to have Scott Porter, partner and head of insolvency at Ellison's, one of our UK law members, facilitating today. We're not discussing a technical topic today. It's a people issue that law firms right across the world are all grappling with. Specifically, how do we attract and retain young litigators? And we're going to hear perspectives, trends and ideas from jurisdictions thousands of miles apart, where law firms have exactly the same issue. And today we're going to hear phrases that we've all become too familiar with, such as the Great Resignation, remote working, burnout, and work-life balance. I remember that. I don't know if you lot do. So please, as I say, participate as much as possible. Remember, we're all friends here. We can talk openly in this forum. So I'm now going to hand over to you, Scott, to get the topic and the session moving forward. So over to you, Scott.
Thanks, Giles. I appreciate that. And interesting, you said it's a people issue, not a technical issue. I think most of us lawyers find technical issues much easier than people issues most of the time. So this is sometimes a difficult topic for us to adjust to. But I think this is a very important topic and something we're certainly all grappling with, as Giles says. And thank you for the opportunity to host this today and to hear different perspectives. I don't think anybody can deny that the legal landscape has changed over the last 18 months. We've gone from a period where 18 months ago people were concerned about their jobs, concerned about how the pandemic would impact on firms. And in the UK here, there were a significant number of redundancies, people losing jobs in the UK legal market, to a position 12 months later where actually many law firms have had an exceptionally good year. And that's created a whole load of vacancies for people trying to recruit to expand or fill the vacancies that were created with the previous redundancy round. It's caused a lot of uncertainty. And I think most of us have experienced at some point in the last 18 months some form of lockdown or forced remote working. We've all had to work out ways to get the best from our staff, to work remotely, to enable them to work from anywhere if they don't have to come into the office. And of course, that's given people more time at home. And that's been a good thing in many ways. Lots of our staff have had opportunities to do things that they haven't done before. But at the same time, they've all been considering their priorities, and some have been considering their life choices and deciding law's not for them and they want to do something else, or they've gone off in a different direction completely. But I think Giles touched on burnout, and I think that's been a very real issue as well. People have felt burnt out. We've had this discussion with staff and with other people in the industry that I know. And I think it's an issue that in the last 18 months, people haven't had a proper break from work or a proper holiday. And someone described it to me last year as it's no longer working from home. It felt like living at work. And that really struck me as something that we all went through that last year. That's exactly how it felt. We were all living in the office. That was very true. People have had to be dealing with additional stress, not just worrying about their own health. They're worrying about the health of their friends and families and loved ones, worrying about financial security and how their law firms they work for are going to be affected. And now we've got this position where everybody wants this flexibility they've become used to. For the last 18 months, people have been working from home. They're not commuting to the office. They're saving money. It's had a lot of positive impacts for staff. And now we're getting struggles with perhaps trying to get people back into the office. And that's something I think will be interesting to hear a bit about today. And there are all these opportunities now for remote working. We've all set up remote working so that we could survive through the lockdowns we've had. And we've now got these opportunities to offer to new staff when we're bringing people in. I think there was one job website in the UK that said they've seen a 400% increase in remote jobs now versus pre-pandemic, which isn't really surprising, but I think we need to adapt, and law firms need to understand that that's the market that's out there. And this is what we're competing with now on a global basis. People can recruit from places they'd never recruited from before. We can all work together. I can have this meeting with you guys from all over the world in the same way I now have meetings with people in my team who usually work in the same office as me. And it's made the world a smaller place in many ways. And I think today we're going to hear various different perspectives on how this has impacted us. And I think we need to consider whether this opportunity for remote working is it an opportunity or is it a threat to our business? I think it could be both. So let's see what people have got to say. And I'd like to hand over to Paul, actually, Paul Marmer from Sherrard's in the UK, who I'm sure you all know. And Paul's going to speak to us about his experience of bigger firms perhaps trying to recruit from areas they wouldn't usually, using this flexible working approach. So Paul, how are you finding things? Oh, I think you're still on mute.
Thank you, Scott.
There we go, that's okay.
Been an extraordinary time for us. It's funny, really, because I thought the pandemic was bad enough, but actually looking back, that was a stroll in the park. That was quite easy by comparison to what's happened after lockdown has eased. And the last, 18 months has been extraordinary whirlwind for everybody. But in our situation at Sherrard's in London and St Albans, but in London, we found that we coped with going to remote working, no problem at all. I mean, not perfect, but we got there really quickly. And we got through the pandemic and everybody had a shared experience with that. And we came out the other end busier than we've ever been before and turning things around and really quite exciting. And then coming out of lockdown, we found we're under attack. We're under attack from the much more powerful firms. I mean, we're speaking among friends here. So Sherrard's is a perfectly decent mid-tier, mid-market law firm, which fits in with the Alliance members. And suddenly we're under attack from the very large Premiership American type firms or leading UK firms who are looking at us and attacking our staff left, right and centre. And it's become an extraordinary market of agents on the phone every day of the week to my colleagues. Wait, is that the phone going? No, it's not. Actually, I'm waiting. I hate it. All my colleagues and team members saying, oh, they've had another agent calling them. And there am I waiting for the phone to go. But that's another story. But all these people are being tapped up left, right and centre. And how do we retain staff? And what's the killer here? And I think I don't know if this is a universal experience, is that the very large American firms are paying incredibly stupid salaries. And it's having a huge knock-on effect in the UK market, and nobody can compete with that. And that means the top tier 100 firms are paying absurd salaries, and those who are in the next tier down, such as our firm, maybe yours, Scott, are under this severe pressure like never before. And from a litigation perspective, it's how do we hold on to our talent? And indeed, it was when we were chewing the cud about how do we retain talent. One of the reasons I was interested in the session and put it forward as a suggestion was to get ideas from people. I mean, what we have found in terms of just throwing out our strategy for dealing with this is what we can offer, and I'm interested in what other people say, is first and foremost the quality of work to our colleagues, which is a smaller mid-tier firm. We can give people much more access to work and frontline responsibility than perhaps our bigger rivals. And that is a good appealing point. And that's very much part of our pitch now in terms of dealing with the agents and emphasizing that to staff internally. The responsibility of the work and the exposure to the client contact is going to be second to none. What we're also finding in our market, and I'm interested in what other people say, is that there's this great talk about flexibility and agility of working. And at Sherrod's, we've always had that because we've been able to adapt and adopt approaches well ahead of other firms. Now we're at a competitive disadvantage because so many other firms have now caught us up and perhaps even, dare I say it, overtaken us. So what I'm interested to hear is whether that experience is not just the same, but we're starting to hear some of the most powerful firms talk about offering flexible and agile working, but in truth, they don't mean it. And things are starting to go back the other way, and they're telling people you can work 2-3 days at home, but they don't mean it, or 4 days, and they're dragging people back into the office. Now, I'm not against people being in the office. In fact, I believe it myself, because I think for the kids and the juniors and the people coming through, you need an element of that. But when they're talking to the more senior people and saying you've got that agility and that experience, and they don't mean it, and they're seeing the pendulum come back, I'm interested in whether that trend is happening globally, or we're just hearing it or wishing it to be true, because then a firm like ours can begin to compete again at that level of the agility and the flexibility which we already had. I mean, there are obvious ways and strategies to dealing with retaining staff, which I'll let others talk to in terms of career structures and feedback. One thing we found is that bringing juniors in from the beginning, from the ground floor upwards, so to hire people as paralegals, especially into the litigation team, and test them out, and then see and feel what they're like, and then bring them on to trainees and have people grow from almost birth to death, is a really great way of not just recruiting, but retaining people. And in that regard, I brought one of my colleagues along, Charlotte Yam, who joined the firm as a paralegal and is now a trainee. And I thought I'd just say to Charlotte, I mean, just share your experience of what it's like being a junior in this market, and then joining as a trainee, just to finish with Charlotte.
Yeah, so I started here as a paralegal, and I was probably a paralegal here in the litigation department for about a year. And it was just really great, to be honest. I got an experience for the firm and the culture at the firm, but also the firm got a feel for me. It was kind of almost an extended interview, if you like, because I was after a training contract at the time, and they got to really see what I was capable of, test my abilities, but also I got to get a feel for what Sherrod's was about. And from my perspective, I suppose it was almost like an extended vacation scheme, or something like that. So it was really, really great. So by the time I got offered a training contract from Sherrod's, I knew exactly what I was getting into. I had relationships with many of the senior members of staff, with the senior members of my team. I knew the kind of work I would be exposed to, the kind of clients I would be exposed to. And having experienced things as a paralegal, the transition was just really, really smooth. And being here and being part of a team where you're given quite a lot of responsibility, it's a constant learning curve. I'm constantly involved in exciting things, and I get given quite a high level of responsibility. Whereas perhaps if I was in a firm which had a larger trainee intake, I'd be more of a number and less of a name. And I definitely feel like almost everyone in the firm here probably knows my name, whether they've worked with me or haven't. And I've really got to be involved in some really exciting things and high level work. I'm currently involved in an injunction case where I've been tasked with organising service to all the banks that we're serving, and being in communication with them, which is obviously quite an important role with a high level of responsibility. And that's been trusted upon me because I've worked in the litigation department for a year before I joined as a trainee. So they have a level of trust in me, which potentially I wouldn't have if I was just joined here and been here for a month or two. So yeah, it's been really, really great to be able to kind of come through the ranks, if you like, and get a feel for the firm, have a firm that get a feel for me. And yeah.
Charlotte, because I'm conscious of our time allocation, just one final question. You don't have to answer this just yet.
Yeah.
The $64,000 question, it is not $64,000. Don't answer money to this question, but when you come to graduate, we need to keep you as a solicitor. What's it going to take to keep you? And that's what today's session is about. But clearly, we run through your veins, don't we?
Yes, I think ultimately it is, you have to remain competitive with salary. Everyone gets up in the morning they might love what they do, but ultimately they don't just do it for free, they're doing it for a paycheck. So I think you have to remain competitive. So yeah.
Oh, that's the wrong answer, but
And the level of work,
yeah,
and
You love the honesty. Well done.
Scott, handing back to you.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Charlotte. That was really interesting. Actually, great to hear Charlotte say the word culture, because I think that's, as Paul says, what can we offer that's different? And I think that's something that us slightly smaller firms do offer that's different to some of the bigger firms. And I've been part of one of these very large London firms for nearly 10 years before Ellison's, and it is a very different culture, especially for the junior staff, the sort of exposure you get to clients and the type of work you get. And I think firms like Ellison's and Shards can offer something very different. But at the same time, I completely understand Paul's point, and I've had the same experience with people I know who've left other firms, joined a big city firm with the promise of flexible working, all the remote working you could want, to find out 2 months later they've changed their policy and everyone has to do 4 days a week in London and they're commuting 2 hours each way. And I think we'll come on to talk about the Great Resignation later, but I think there could well be another one in a few months' time when people realise the flexibility offered wasn't quite what it cracked up to be, and they're going back to where they came from. But of course, one of the issues we've got at the moment is getting people back into the office. And I want to hand over to Boris, who I think is going to talk to us about his experience. So Boris from Audalis in Germany, and talk to us about his experiences and also touch on what struggles you've had trying to get people back into the office, as well as some of these other issues. How are you finding things, Boris?
Well, fortunately, it's not so bad over here because luckily our staff also appreciates to be in the office. Of course, it always depends on how long you have to commute from home to the office.
Yeah.
And public transport it's a mess. And of course, everybody is really afraid catching COVID again, or for the first time in the public transport system. But on the other hand, most of our staff, they see that's actually also good to be in the office. You can leave your mother's or your father's role at home. You can be the lawyer, you can be the colleague, you take over these roles, and you basically meet up with your colleagues, you have a coffee together. It's a bit of like being back to normal, or to pre-corona sort of life. And therefore, basically, we had a survey. We asked everyone to tell us how they want to do it in the future, how many days to be in the office, how many days they want to stay at home. And basically, more or less all of them said 3 days at home, 2 days in the office. So what we are going to do is we are, of course, accepting this, and we are going to create a desk sharing model in a way. So basically, we will not need additional office space, but basically two colleagues have to share one desk, and they in a way have to see how they figure it out when they will be in the office and when they will be at home. So basically giving responsibility to the staff and giving them the freedom to decide. The only thing we want is that they deliver in time, that all the meetings are kept, and apart from that, they can work from the beach, they can work from wherever they are. And I think that's part of the future and how we retain our staff, that we give them all the flexibility and agility they want. We also have a couple of staff members who really prefer to be in the office all day. Like one of my associates, he wants to be here. And we also accept that. And yeah, that's the way. Apart from what I want to mention, what Paul said, I want to react to that as well, as we have exactly the same situation here. Headhunters have become, from nuisance, they have become a real severe threat to our business. In a way, the wages paid by the big law firms, it's just, I don't even find the words to describe it. And in a way, we also have to, we discuss regularly on how we deal with this threat. And we also suffered a severe blow earlier this year. Our head of employment law department basically decided that she doesn't want to work as a lawyer anymore. And we had severe problems to find somebody to take over and to basically get all the employment law issues done over here. So I'm also with Paul that it's about a trainee program. Right now, I had a very clever trainee. He's not still very sure whether he wants to become a lawyer, but I'm really on his neck and I'm trying to win him for the firm. So I will hopefully tell you in a couple of months whether that worked out or not. And what we like is our mentorship program. So basically, all of you are maybe Gabe. Gabe is from California. He's for sure he's a Star Wars fan. So basically, it's all about having a Padawan and like having a one-to-one situation where you have one partner who's responsible for you, who you walk with him through all the client meetings, to all the court hearings. And basically he will learn, or the trainee will learn all this stuff from that one partner who's responsible for him or her. And yeah, that's how we try to retain our trainees and secure the future of the firm.
That's great. I really like that, Boris. Actually, what I'm hearing from you there is talking about the mentorship program, which is something we do as well. But you've talked about mentoring people, you've surveyed the staff to see what their opinions are. And I think all of those things are making your staff feel valued. And I think that's really important. That's going to help you retain people because they feel like you care about what they want rather than just coming out with a policy and forcing it on people, whether they like it or not, and saying, this is what it is, you've got to do 3 days a week here or whatever it might be. So I think that's absolutely a really positive message to be sending to people. And I like the idea that you've surveyed them. We've certainly talked to our staff as well. And again, I think it all helps people feel valued. And I think we're going to talk to Jeff next. I think we've got some slides for this, but Jeff's going to talk to us about the Great Resignation. And I'm not sure whether this was a US phrase in the first place, actually, Jeff. You might be able to confirm for us, but it's been floating around this year quite a lot.
Yeah, I haven't found a way to attribute the actual phrase to others. I think you're still, yeah, there I am on the screen now. But I have seen pretty consistently that this language is being used to describe it. And just to introduce myself, I'm a partner in Cleveland, Ohio, in the eastern half of the United States. And I am also one of the heads of the litigation area for my firm, which I discovered during COVID as I sort of gotten promoted into that position, which means that people come and actually resign to me. Because the first time someone did it, I said, that's good, you should probably talk to someone about it. And then I realized they were talking to me. One of the things that I think a lot of us are trying to understand is this term even real? Because we're all facing, in some ways, just an acceleration of the forces that we've always seen. I mean, if you sort of look at everyone who's resigned from all of your respective firms, if I give you the categories, I went to a bigger firm for more money. I went to a bigger city because there were more opportunities. I wanted to move home to my small town that I grew up in. I decided to stay home with my kids, or I went in-house. I mean, these are things that have been happening forever, and they're challenging, difficult things. They were accelerated by the millennials, but they are not unique to whatever is called the Great Resignation. And so what people are trying to do is understand, is there in fact a difference between what's going on or otherwise? I have to, I think, share my screen, and hopefully you can see that. So the question is really, has anything changed? And that's certainly a fair question. There have been a number of articles that are out there, again, people sort of circulating this phrasing, and there seems to be several schools of thought. One is the yes, and this is from an article in Bloomberg Law, which says basically we're seeing it because everybody's calling Harvard's placement center, and that means that would be a strong indication that big law are paying people to go. And I don't think that's different than any of the experience that we've all seen. There's people and there's a lot of movement. But is this really a grand resignation, or is this merely just a change in the marketplace that people can offer more money because there's demand? And that leads to a different school of thought, which is no, which is all it really means is people are moving to bigger firms. They're not going and sort of, living their whole lives in some different way. They're simply just going to the firm that pays them more money. And maybe you should all just come up and meet their amounts, or you should accept the fact that you're going to lose your associates. There's a third school of thought that is and this is sort of further, they called it the Great Reshuffling, which is sort of another way of describing it. There's a third school of thought that is out there. But before we get into that, I mean, if we look at the statistics, especially if you talk about big law, and big law in the United States is the top 250 law firms, which are really a very small group if you talk about it. And sometimes it's even talking about the top 100 law firms. And what they're saying is that there's actually less movement. But I think that statistic really distorts what's going on in the marketplace, because what we're seeing is maybe big law is keeping constant by offering more money, but everyone else is paying the price. And one theory out there is that it's really just a recognition that especially some of the big law firms stopped hiring during COVID. And when they stopped hiring during COVID, they need to fill those spots rather than, instead of trying to find people in their marketplaces and competing law firms, it's simply to go pick off the smaller or mid-sized law firms who are well trained. And so again, that would seem to suggest the great reshuffling description that was mentioned earlier. What we're finding, at least from real world examples, is this isn't really a money problem. Because I'll tell you, I'm of the school of thought that this is a real problem, that this isn't just some hypothetical, and I give you some reasons why I think so. Because the associates I'm talking to who are moving around, it's usually not just money. Yeah, money is an issue, but they are looking for something different. And often it is not at all money. We're seeing a lot of movement because of return to work, meaning that people say, well, this firm, and I think we've heard other comments from this from Scott, are promising that I can work completely remotely. And they use as justifications what we call the fairness concerns. Well, all the partners stay home, so why should the associates have to come in? Or the secretary, some secretaries can stay in, some can't because of health concerns. We should all be given the same treatment. The other thing that we're hearing is COVID-19. Not everyone in the United States is vaccinated. And at this point, there is no law in the United States that requires all employers to vaccinate. That likely will be in effect very, very soon, but it's currently the subject of court challenges, and it will not be effective for very small law firms, which means some people say, I'm scared of COVID-19, I can't come back to work. And it's interesting because I'm not saying that their concerns aren't sincere, but oftentimes they're looking for a justification and they search for these excuses, which are reasonable and legitimate concerns that may not have concerned them recently. The other thing we're hearing, which suggests that there's a lot of itchiness to move, is what we hear is conflicting demands. People are saying, I want more freedom, but then they don't want the responsibility. Anybody who brings in $1 million in work can have all the freedom to work wherever they want because they're in control. But they want the freedom without the responsibility to handle all of that work. We hear about people saying they want more time, but then they also don't want to give up the money that they're getting. And so they'll often go to firms where they're getting more money and not more time at all. We're hearing demands for more collegiality, but then they don't want to commute in to be in the firm where they could be more collegial. They want to work from home. And we're often hearing demands for more training. So we structure and have training exercises, but probably the best training you can receive in any law firm anywhere in the world is walking down the hall and talking to one of your colleagues, whether it's a peer or a partner or someone else, and they don't want to participate in that. And so we're hearing a lot of excuses, but what really is going on is just some concern in the marketplace that there's something better out there, and I want to chase that something better out there. But again, is this a great resignation or a great reshuffling? Well, I wanted to give some case examples to suggest that there is partially a great resignation. And I'll give two associates. I'm not going to identify them. And if I mention gender, it is by mistake because I am intentionally being ambiguous as to who these people are. The first one is case study A, It's a 5th-year associate, someone who grew up in the firm, very quality lawyer. The lawyer went to a top law school and came out with great experience. The lawyer is married with no children, and although we certainly want everyone to achieve whatever they can, those are usually the years where you're putting in the most effort and the most time because you have the least conflicts. Earlier reviews were very strong for this associate, did excellent work. But then, particularly during COVID, we started seeing concerns about work ethic. How hard was this person working? And it turned out that the attorney and the attorney's spouse had several hobbies, including travel. And one of their things they like to do is they bought a van and restored this van so they could do national travel, go to the national parks. One of the things you can do in the United States and probably in most other places is get a vacation van. And these are places you can live. And there are very remote places in the United States that don't have cell coverage and don't have access. And that meant that when this person started taking vacations, they weren't vacations somewhere where they could be reached. In addition, we noticed with this associate that phone habits got worse. And what do I mean? That means that every single time, without fail, when I talked to this associate, I got a voicemail. It didn't matter if this was during work hours, weekends, nights, I always got voicemail. Essentially, this associate had taken to call screening all attorneys, all clients, everyone going on. And we noticed a resist to work from home. And so one day, this attorney came into my office and said, I appreciate you supporting me, but I've decided to go in a different direction and I want to pursue an alternative opportunity. And I said, oh, what's that? And that is van life. That is giving up the practice of law and moving around and living in a van, driving around to the Great Lakes in the United States, dragging a little sailboat and sailing in there. And I had several questions. First of all, can I join you? Second, what are you doing for money? Did you just inherit a bunch of money? And this attorney explained that they had saved up money and they were going to at least be able to do this for 2 years. And what was particularly interesting is I said, okay, are you going to come back when you're done? No, I really don't know what we're going to do. Are you interested in making a connection, doing perhaps remote document review? Maybe you want to keep your finger in the law, and that's a good way to keep your finger in and make some money, and maybe you can live your van life for another few years, doing it all by satellite. No, the decision I've made is we really want to have a change of life, and we're going to figure it out in 2 years. So I lost an associate to van life. We'll see how that works out. Case study B is a paralegal we had, a paralegal who considered law school, but became a paralegal for a small firm, eventually shifted to a large firm as a secretary, and then wanted the goal of being a paralegal, married, no children, worked very well during COVID, adopted an elderly dog, and enjoyed in her free time restoring race cars and the family van, another van, and was offered a job as a paralegal with a big raise, travel opportunity, exactly what this secretary was working for, but turned down the job because there was an opportunity to be a paralegal for a much smaller firm with much less opportunities where this paralegal could stay at home and take care of the dog. We're not talking about taking care of an elderly relative. And by the way, in their free time, what they could do was travel in their van. So now I've had 2 people who I've both had to ask, are you influencers? Do I have to follow you on Instagram? Because this seems like a very interesting lifestyle that I'm not participating in. But while these are certainly anecdotal, we are seeing examples of people who are trying to consider different choices. And the only thing to negotiate with is not economic. It's not what we think. It's issues like flexibility, acknowledging that a job is much more a transactional issue, that they can treat one firm as another, giving up the idea that someone's going to sort of earn their way up. They want it now. They require attention, which is particularly challenging in a COVID period. And they need these individuals need hard work and recognition and advancement, not simply, this is great, we'll pay you a little bit more and give you a bump up. But my most important advice is, don't let your people get vans. That is clearly what I've learned from this experience.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Jeff. You certainly had some interesting experiences, and I'm interested to know actually whether you think those two people would have had the same experience if we hadn't been through this recently. Do you think this is arising because of the pandemic and the changes to lifestyle we've had?
I know it is. I mean, because both of them said, now that I've been doing this and I've been away from the office, I realize what I've been missing. Yeah. And I want to take advantage of this and use this time where everyone's allowed to be free and do whatever they want to do. And it was, you know, on one hand, I admire their interest in doing it. On the other hand, I think we all know that building a law career is about developing skills, clients, and relationships inside and outside. Yeah. And these are not things that you can take 2 years off from. And I've not known a lot of people, with the exception of people who have had children and taken a few years off and come back, I haven't known a lot of people who have left the practice and have come back. No. And I think they're setting themselves up for, you know, if what they want is freedom when they come back to a law firm in 5 years or 3 years, I don't think they're going to get it, because they're going to be set back so many years that they're going to have to start at the bottom of the totem pole again.
That's it, isn't it? And I'm surprised they weren't interested in the option to keep their hand in the law by doing some remote work as well. I think that was a great suggestion from you, actually. It shows your flexibility and commitment to staff as well. So that was excellent. But very interesting times. And I think it's that's just what you said about it being accelerated and accelerating problems that were already there. I think that's very true, but you're right, there certainly are new problems where people have just had different perspectives on life over the last 18 months. And I do think some of it is from burnout in some cases. And I think people are thinking they need a break from what they're doing and it's all got too much, and particularly at the junior end. So I think it's throwing up problems that we haven't seen before. And I think that there's some very interesting ways there to deal with it. So that's great. I think we want to hear now from, we've got Darko from law firm Trepnowski in North Macedonia, who's going to share his experiences on issues with...
We haven't got Darko, who's not here yet.
Have we not?
He may not make it. I've emailed him about 10 minutes ago, but he's not entered the room yet. So no problem. Over maybe to go to Gabe, maybe.
Yeah, no, that's fine. So Gabe was next on the list, I think. So it'd be good to hear from you, see if you've had the same van life problems with your staff.
We have not had the van life problems out here in California as of yet, and you know, there's just so much to unpack in this conversation, and I really think the star of the show is Charlotte, because we're all exposing ourselves as dinosaurs, so to speak. But I think there is a great resignation going on. And I apologize, although it's not us, for the United States firms that are paying outrageous amounts of money and are driving the movement that we're seeing. Well, what I've seen out here, interestingly, is that a lot of litigation departments did lay off workers, lay off attorneys, lay off paralegals, lay off staff, and that's because in California they shut the courts down, and we all kind of sat around twiddling our thumbs for a couple of months until they figured out what they were going to do with us, and then they had to rev back up, and that's why we're seeing, like everyone else is experiencing, headhunters calling left and right. And we are seeing attorneys out here move for more money. And it's a short-lived thing, because these individuals that are moving for more money, 2 years ago, while money was a factor, they wanted lifestyle. They didn't want to have to work late nights and weekends that we all have grown accustomed to. And what's interesting is while litigation dipped during the pandemic, corporate work skyrocketed. And so I find myself, because I do recruiting for our California office, I find myself talking to big firm corporate lawyers who want to move, who don't want to put in the hours they've been putting out, and who are saying the money is just not worth it. And they're looking to move down where they can still do some sophisticated work, but they don't have to build 3,000 hours a year and work around the clock, yada, yada, yada. And so I'm sitting here going, okay, this is, you know, we're on the struggle bus right now, so to speak, in terms of trying to keep our associates and having to compete with these, you know, AmLaw 100 firms offering obscene amounts of money to attorneys. But if what I'm seeing is correct, there's going to be a course correction in a few years where these people are going to realize work from home is what was a fallacy, so to speak, that they're being asked to come back in, that the money's not worth it, the hours are not worth it. And I think that this is gonna resettle, and we will find our equilibrium here. But I was happy to hear Charlotte say that, you know, that culture is important, because that's something that we focus on out here in our California office is the culture. And while we don't face the issues necessarily with staff being recruited by bigger firms to work remotely, largely because each state it has its own method of practicing law. And so I couldn't, you know, you can't get somebody from California to really do something in Texas or what have you without them having to be trained up. I also have the benefit of nobody wants to pay the outrageous, you know, amounts of money you have to pay out here to live in San Diego. So no one wants to hire a secretary out here. They're going to hire him in Ohio, where Jeff is, where they can get him for a better dollar. But the legal assistants don't want to move because they like the culture. They like the attorneys that they work with. You know, I do not see staff as fungible. I see them as a right arm to the lawyer, and they work in concert with the lawyer, and you cannot accomplish them. Some days I call it voodoo. I draft a document, give it to them, and they make it look beautiful, and all of a sudden all the other lawyers have it and the courts have it too. And great. And I respect them for that. And I think those things matter to them and are what are keeping our staff, at least out here in California, in place, despite the sort of wildfire of hiring that we're seeing right now. But circling back to the more direct question, no van lifers yet out here, although, you know, I do think that the pandemic has forced people to evaluate their priorities. But I haven't seen, we haven't faced any departures out here yet, you know, in terms of a change of career.
You've possibly got the right work-life balance in California already, so nobody wants to go traveling anywhere else. But actually, I think that was interesting when you said people are moving for money, and I think that's initially, but there will be a course correction. And I think that's exactly my view, that there's been an opportunity with the surge in vacancies we've had here in the UK recently. People are seeing, you know, where they may have applied before for 2 or 3 jobs when they wanted to move, they've now got 10, 15, 20 opportunities they can apply for, and there are less people looking for these jobs. So there's more opportunity for them to move, more opportunity for them to go and earn more money, and they're being promised all sorts of things. But I think you're right, these people moving are probably moving for something other than money, really. There's something they inherently didn't like about the firm, or something that wasn't fitting, and whether they'll find that at the new place or not, or there'll be a course correction, I think is probably on the cards. And I think we've heard it from just about everybody so far today, this idea of culture being important. And I think that's all we can do, really, in terms of retaining people. The most important thing is how they feel when they're coming to work, the people they get on with, whether they feel part of a team, part of something bigger. They know what the firm's goal is. They know what their own personal objectives are. They feel part of the mission. They know what they're doing and where they're going. And I think if you can keep that and people buy into what you're doing, then you're on the right track and people will stick around. So I think it's been very interesting. Thanks for that, Gabe. Appreciate that. Giles, have we got Darko on? I think was the only other person who wanted to speak today.
Darko's not here, Scott. He's obviously something's come up. He's working on a case or something. Unfortunately, did you want to pick?
He's probably bought a van.
Gabe, yeah, probably. Gabe, sorry, not Gabe. So one point that came up before was, and which Gabe did refer to, was this fact that lawyers can't practice anywhere in the world because there are licensing implications even within the US. Is one thing was, is it a global marketplace now for lawyers? Has the pandemic changed that with people being able to work from anywhere and having more flexibility? What are people seeing on that side?
I know that Jeff has orbited near that, in terms of how that affects our licensure in prior conversations. But my sense is it's not really the case here per se. You can't, in theory, I could go back to my hometown in Pennsylvania and still practice law in California while I'm sitting in my house in Pennsylvania because I'm licensed in California, but I couldn't practice law in Pennsylvania. So you still sort of compartmentalized by your jurisdiction here in the United States. So that prevents some amount of movement.
Do you think it's
but I would say anecdotally that I was talking to another law firm and they had just lost an associate to a firm in Boston, Massachusetts, which is a pretty high paying market from here. And they were hiring this associate to work in real estate, which is historically a very, very local practice in Rochester, New York, which is an even smaller market, by a Boston firm. And this associate would never move to Rochester, which in the short run, this associate, I'm not sure if it's a he or she, now has, a very significant salary increase by making this move. On the other hand, I can think of no practice where you have less long-term value than doing real estate work in a place you do not live and are not familiar with. So people are doing that sort of cherry picking around, not just relocating people, but essentially making that a remote offer. Obviously, the attorney will eventually have to take the New York bar because it's New York State, but that's not an impossibility.
It's possibly short-term moves without necessarily considering long-term career impact. I've certainly heard of someone who worked for a bigger firm, and during the pandemic, he was originally from Italy, working for a firm in London. During the pandemic, when everybody was on lockdown working remotely, he gave up his flat in London, moved to Italy, and it took 3 months before anybody at the firm realized he was living and working in Italy. And then the question is, well, what do they do about it? Do they ask him to come back to the office, or do they continue employing him to work in London but live in Italy?
Can I jump in?
Yeah, please, people.
It's a similar theme, but a different point, different angle at speaking from a litigation perspective. So the last 18 months, we've been involved in case after case online in terms of court hearings, including some really large trials. But last week, we got it before a judge for an injunction, the one that Charlotte's working on. And we were actually called into court physically. It was like back in the High Court of Justice in London with all the old-fashioned paper, and we all had to get into court. And that was like, what the hell's going on? I'm not used to going into a court building. And I guess the point is, if we're going to have to start going to court, you're not going to be able to live in fancy lakeside villas in Como or wherever it might be. And what I'm interested in hearing is whether other people around the world, where their courts have gone online and virtual, are now saying, hey guys, time to come back in. And is that happening elsewhere? I see Gabe nodding, and to see if this is more of a global trend on litigation and what's happening else out there, please.
Out here in California, it's going to differ by location. Like in Los Angeles, they're still remote, but down in San Diego, the judges are at the point where they're ready to sanction people for not showing up in person for their court hearings. They are trying to get it back on track.
That's interesting.
Okay.
What about Boris? What about in Germany? What's the situation there?
It depends on really if you only exchange your legal views on the subject, or whether you have to hear witnesses or question technical experts or something. We really see it's so important to be there in person. So to answer Paul's question, really yes, litigators need to be close to the courts, and they have to get there in time to be around, because you miss so many things on screen when you're far away, about what is going on, about the vibrations. Does the witness lie or not? It can be decisive for the
is the judge with you or not? Yeah.
And the judges, they try to also get the people back, the lawyers back to the courts, because usually they're not so familiar with the technology. And then there's only like 1 or 2 chambers actually having the technology, so it's not always available. So they are more conservative a lot, so they want everything being back to pre-corona.
Yeah, I'm certainly seeing a mixture. Most of all of my work really is in the High Court, a lot of it in the Companies Court, and some of the judges there love the online hearings, and they want everything done electronically with electronic bundles to very specific standards, and hearings done remotely. Others, even for a remote hearing, they want you to send a paper bundle in, and they want to have the papers in front of them. And then others want you there in person. So we're getting a bit of mixed messages at the moment. I think that's going to have to work its way out. But yeah, that's an interesting point. Thanks for that. Charles, have we got anybody else who wants to
I don't think so, Scott. No, I could maybe just share a quick story from the accounting world. It's probably no consolation, probably, because it's a different profession. But the accountants are also struggling with keeping people. Lots of stories of firms losing good staff through the pandemic. And one story from one of our Canadian accounting firms saying that their staff have been receiving calls from PwC USA, telling them or offering them a lot more money to stay in Canada, but work for a firm in the US. So that's the sort of challenge they're up against. Big firms like that throwing a lot of money at people, at firms in a different jurisdiction. So it is unprecedented, I think, but it's going on. So we just need to be.
There's a lot of that, potentially people recruiting staff that they're never going to expect to see or may never see in the office. These are going to be remote staff only, which maybe that's going to become a thing. Perhaps not for anybody that has to go to court, though.
Yeah, I can see Boris wants to come back on. Boris?
I would like to know from you guys, is that their answer to demographic change? How bad is demographic change in your countries? Because we have a big problem here. After reunification, like birth rates drop down, and that's now the people that graduate and come to the market, the millennials. They are like, in comparison to the baby boomers or the generation between baby boomers and millennials, they are so few, and that's basically a huge problem we have here, especially as litigators. We need like 100% language skills. Sometimes it's only a word that is decisive for a whole case. And that's why we have this war for talents here, because demographic change really makes the difference. And there is just so few millennials who are also willing to become a lawyer. So I would like to know how is the situation in France, Cedric, and how is it in California, and from wherever you are, Mark.
I mean, I think we're talking in the United States, we're generally talking about several years of small law school classes. So that's affecting things. It tends to be more how many people go to law school, not our population change. And when the big law firms weren't hiring, people went in a different direction. Some people in past crises have, when economic crises, have gone to law school to sort of weather the storm. We didn't see that. But those have returned. They're back and pretty robust. And so we don't see that as much of an issue. The challenge is really the lack of hiring, and now this sort of sucking sound from some of the bigger firms trying to pull people in.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, actually. I think we've probably not got the same issue in the UK with younger millennial people. I think we've still got a good influx of those, and we've got some new schemes available in the UK. So we're taking people on as apprentices at 18, and they train all the way through for 5-6 years on different schemes now. So you can take people in at a younger age and try and bring them through the ranks, as Paul was describing earlier. So that's another useful way. So that's helping to fill that gap, I think. Has anybody else got any other observations from around the world on that particular issue?
No, in France, I don't feel that we have a problem. The job is still appealing, and there is no crisis in the university for law studies. So I'm comfortable with that.
That's good. They haven't all bought vans and gone to become YouTubers.
No, my junior, they often say that they want to raise goats in the middle of France, and I use my experience in agriculture to explain them that raising goats is not as appealing as it seems when you don't know what you're talking about. So no, we don't have this kind of problems.
That's good to hear.
But now you understand the liberal approach of Germany towards immigration.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting perspective. Again, Giles, have you got anything else to add on your side?
I don't think so. I think we're actually out of time.
Yeah,
Scott, I think we've probably all got elderly dogs to look after, or vans to go and clean.
To look at vans for sale, yeah.
So, but I think you know, it's not all bad news for mid-sized firms. I think is what we hear today. I think it's like Scott said, it's about culture. It's about creating a purpose, maybe at your firms, and certainly a good team ethos. I think we've heard some good ideas today. We've heard ideas about using paralegals, hiring paralegals, being more flexible. You know, don't just treat staff as a number. Look at mentorship, surveying staff. There's been some great ideas. I think it's been good fun and hopefully informative for everybody. Scott, you've done a great job anchoring this session. Thank you very much.
No, thanks everyone for their input. Appreciate that.
Stepping up. And thank you to our other speakers, exactly as Scott has said. We've had a very good 2021 with this group. I think the pandemic has got us into action and forced us to run these sessions, but let's keep them going through 2022. If anybody would like to step up and run a session, we'd love to hear from you. So thank you again to everybody, and take care of yourselves, and see you all again soon. So thanks everybody.
Thanks
everyone.
Soon.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.